Hello everyone, welcome to the Sweeney Show, Business and Law podcast. I'm David Sweeney, and joining me here today is David O'Dowd. David O'Dowd is a solicitor and partner in John Gaynor Solicitors. David, you're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dave. Pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh no, great. Thank you very much for your time. How have you been coping with this COVID-19?
Yeah, so I suppose like everyone, obviously it needs to be said that kind of what we're all doing in business and commercially kind of pales in comparison with the kind of health side of things and first responders and people working in hospitals and everything else. I mean, I don't think business matters when it comes to that, but just solely focusing commercially, which I suppose is all we kind of are really qualified to talk about. It's in some ways it's encouraged us to improve our remote working, which I think is crucially important. Probably something we pushed off. We were of the old-fashioned mindset that you need to be in the office, and that you need to have your physical files and everything else. But it turns out that we were actually doing quite a lot that would allow us to work remotely anyway. We were scanning everything into the system, be it post or DX post or emails or telephone calls, whatever it might be. So, and we have the cloud-based software file management system anyway, which kind of mirrors the hard file. So whilst it's been a bit slow to kind of get used to doing it, we're all actually kind of getting up to speed with it. So not too bad. I think like a lot of people, and I know we're going to speak about property a bit later on, there's a bit of a lead time for solicitors in that obviously the property goes on the market, the estate agents get involved. By the time we come in, it's probably 4 weeks down the line. So the pipeline may suffer a little bit in a couple of weeks' time. As in we're still working on quite a lot of the work that we got before COVID-19 hit. You kind of forget that it was only a couple of weeks ago that it actually hit, and everything was fine up to that point and quite good, in fact. So we'll see. We're like everyone, we're doing everything we can, and that's all you can do.
And just on your own, I suppose, personal legal journey, Dave. I know we will get into conveyancing and purchasing of first-time buyers and that pathway in a few minutes. Yeah. Your background is in science, is it?
That's right, funnily enough, yeah. So I undertook an undergraduate degree in science in UCD in 2004. Now, at the time, points were actually quite low for science, which I don't usually tell people because it makes me look a lot smarter than they've kind of gone through the roof. So at the time, look, I was probably more concerned with playing rugby and heading out to whatever it was, So I did all right in the leaving cert, not amazing, but my options were probably limited to kind of a broad sort of degree. So I was probably thinking along the lines of something in arts or science. I quite liked science. I did biology for the leaving cert and quite enjoyed the kind of process and structure involved in it. Didn't really know a huge amount until I got into it, but I actually really enjoyed it. Yeah, I did a 4-year degree and specialised in biochemistry. And what was quite good about the degree was that between third year and fourth year, I did an internship in a pharmaceutical company. So that gave me a bit of an insight into what sort of career was out there should you wish to go into that sort of area. And then in the final year, you did a thesis, which was kind of 3 months of lab-based work, and then you did up your thesis and everything else. So that kind of gave you an insight into what the PhD guys would be doing. I realised it neither really would have been suited to myself, to be honest with you, even though a huge amount of respect for particularly PhD students. I think it's amazing work that they do, and it's years of absolutely toiling, but it's great to have that completed PhD afterwards, But I just realised it was for me, so then I kind of looked to see what else is out there, and thankfully when you have an undergraduate degree, there's a lot of different options open for you, and law was one of them. So I was delighted to get into it, to be honest.
And did you train in John Gaynor's or did you train somewhere else?
No, so believe it or not, so I did, after science, I did a 1-year postgraduate diploma in DIT, which, having done it, a lot of people seem to have done it as well. It's kind of a conversion where there was loads of us in there from all different backgrounds, be it engineering and business backgrounds and science and what have you. So I did that as a bit of an insight into law, quite enjoyed that, and I got to know some great people who I'm still very close with, who went into being a barrister, being a solicitor. From there I did my FE1s, and then following that I started in John Gaynor Co in 2011, I think it was July 2011, and I suppose it's kind of poignant at the moment with God knows what we'll be facing after all this, but obviously the recession was kind of in full flow at that point. Yeah. So in a way, it was good. And I think particularly my generation of solicitors kind of all we knew really was kind of working and training in a recession. You know, you kind of came in there and everyone was struggling. Everyone was finding it difficult. A lot of my friends did traineeships, weren't paid. You know, there was none of this kind of demands for wages or anything like that. You were just delighted to have a traineeship, to be honest. And I was delighted John took me on. And yeah, I mean, I don't really buy into the whole title sort of thing, but I mean, I was so low down the ladder, I probably didn't even have a title. You know, I was kind of scanning in the post and the DX and doing court filing and just whatever I could to make myself useful, to be honest. You know,
yeah, that's probably the best training, is it? A hands-on experience, just jumped into everything.
100%, yeah. And to be fair to John, he's a good process of leading people through. So you start with that. You may not see it at the time, but even starting with scanning in post and going to the different courts offices and the probate office and even meeting clients, greeting them at the door, the telephone, all this sort of stuff, it kind of builds up the culture of a kind of an old-fashioned legal practice where you look after the client and you make sure that they're comfortable. And some people come into a solicitor's practice, you know, they're not delighted to be there and they've been nervous and everything else. And particularly if you're the first face that they see when they go in, it's important, you know. So I started with that, and that was July 2011, I think it was. And then thankfully I got my traineeship then, I suppose, officially in the end of that year. Started Blackhall the following year, September 2012, and qualified in 2014. And then from there, thankfully, I was offered partnership about a year later, which is probably about 2015. Myself and John have been partners at the firm since.
Very good. And so I know you have a full general practice law firm where you have litigation, conveyancing, probate. Just in particular in conveyancing, how do you think the COVID-19 or this is going to affect the property market at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose first thing we can only kind of hypothesize and guess to a certain extent. I think a lot of it will come down to confidence. And I hope, because things were relatively good before this hit, and it hit all of a sudden, and it really had nothing to do with people's ability to get a mortgage or to find a property. I mean, there was a huge, obviously we know there was a huge amount of demand for property, you know. So I think people maybe will take a little bit of a step back. There might be a small bit of a pause, but I'm hopeful that this will allow properties to be built and we'll just get right back into it again. You know, I think it will take a couple of weeks, but, you know, I mean, once people can get back to work and can get a bit more confidence in terms of the income, they'll be more comfortable, you know, taking out the loan and getting the mortgage, which I think is the big thing, because look, no one likes being in debt, and a mortgage is a significant amount of debt. But look, as we all know, if you want to get a property, you just have to kind of get relatively comfortable with that. And I think a big thing that I always tell people is it's not always about how much you can get off the bank, because that's not the way you should be looking. It's what are you comfortable in paying, you know? And if you've been paying rent for a year or so and it's at a certain amount and you're used to that and your lifestyle is adapted around that, maybe try and get a mortgage that will have the same sort of monthly payments as the rent you were doing, you know, would probably be a good. And then look, you know, even if you don't progress in your career as quickly as you would have liked because of this COVID-19, at least you're comfortable in that instance in paying off your mortgage, you know. So look, we'll see.
That's great advice. So if you were a first-time buyer out there in the market, and notwithstanding the current pandemic we're going through, but in the normal market, and you were first-time buyer, you're viewing houses, you're meeting auctioneers, you're watching online. What there's a lot of noise out, a lot of information. What are the steps involved in a conveyance? Like, what do you have to expect?
I suppose, I've kind of adapted this from what we try to do, and I suppose it's a bit of kind of business tactics in it. When we get in a quotation, we obviously want to try and get the business. So what we always try to encourage people to do is to come into our office for a free consultation. Okay, there's kind of two things. Look, we have the information and we're happy to give it. Is one. We like meeting people in person, although look, we'll see after COVID-19 if that's still possible. But it also helps us with conversion. Okay, so what I usually do when I meet people in person is I kind of sit them down, have a chat, and before they get into unloading all the questions that they may have, I say, look, let me just draw out this little diagram for you, let you know what you need to do when, what bits you need to have in place at what time, so that you can kind of get the jumble out of your head. And that usually helps. So what I say to people is there's kind of 3 different stages within a conveyancing transaction. Okay, 1, 2, and 3, if you like. The first is we receive the contracts as the buyer solicitor. Okay, the middle stage is you sign the contract. And then the final stage, stage 3, is you close, which is where the buyer gets the keys and the seller gets the money. So what I always tell people is usually when they come into me, which is what I encourage people to do, they're not yet on that timeline. So they've just possibly gone sale agreed, or ideally they're still looking. So they're just before stage 1. Then when they go sale agreed, they pay their booking deposit. And that's when we can kind of get involved. Okay, so particularly, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
No, that booking deposit then, is that a refundable payment, or how does that work?
Yeah, so what I always tell people is right up until you sign the contract, you're all good. So it's I suppose it's really a statement of intent for the estate agent. It lets everyone know that the buyer is serious. But really, a purchaser could pay their booking deposit, and you go through the couple of weeks before you sign the contract. And if for whatever reason the buyer decided to pull out, you can ask for that booking deposit back straight away, and the estate agent would always give it. So it really is non-binding.
And so when the purchaser pays the booking deposit to the auctioneer will then take the property off the market. They would sell a sales notice to both solicitors, the selling solicitor and the purchasing solicitor, and then the selling solicitor will send out contracts for sale, title, planning, building regulations. So when you're acting for a purchaser and you get a set of contracts in, what are you looking for in those documents?
Yeah, so I suppose, look, the first obvious thing is to see in what form of title it's in. There's the old-fashioned form that people may know from the big fold-out deeds with the squiggly writing, and we're trying to convert it into the new form, which is the automated online folio, which is a series of digits, which is a lot easier for solicitors, yourself, when you have the registered form of title. But that kind of depends on what path you go down. So really what we have is quite a systematic way of just going through every single item. As boring as it sounds, we start with the contract, and things I do is I look at the purchase price, make sure that the maths are right, in that it's 10%, and then the 90% is accurate, make sure the names are right and the PPS numbers are there and everything else. And then from there, really, you get into systematically working through the contract and the documents that are given to you. And as you know yourself, quite often with pre-contract inquiries, which is the initial set of questions that we would raise, there's template questions that you'd raise for almost every single purchase. And then depending on what's given to you, you may have specific points that you want to draw the seller's solicitor's attention to. Maybe something that's been omitted by accident, something they're still waiting on, whatever it might be. It's not to try to catch anyone out. The seller's solicitor by no means is trying to catch out the purchaser's solicitor, but it just could be something that you just want a bit of more information on.
And is there a difference for if a first-time buyer is buying a new build or an existing house, or not going in as owner occupier?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I suppose it's more and more popular, the new build properties, and we actually deal with a huge amount of those. I think in particular they seem to be popular for first-time buyers. The Help to Buy scheme helps a lot, which is I suppose a portion of funds that the government really give towards the deposit, and it's based upon your income tax that you paid for the previous 4 years. So what I always tell people to do at the start, when you're going to your banks and seeing what sort of mortgage you can get, start your Help to Buy application as well, because if you're able to get 20 grand, which would go towards specifically a new build property under 500,000 euro, then you can kind of work that in with your mortgage, and it lets you know how much you're entitled to get.
I think is it up to 5% and maxed at around?
That's it. Yeah, exactly. So it's up to 5%. Or 20,000, I think is what they say, whichever is the lowest, I suppose, between the two of them. Yeah.
That's a great benefit for people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's massive. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose officially we don't know how long it's going to last for. They always kind of say, for I think it's 6-month periods of time. But so far so good. It's been there for quite a while, and hopefully it will still be there for quite a bit into the future, because it is a massive help.
The practicalities of that for someone buying a house is that instead of like traditionally you would have had 10% of your own savings, you can borrow 90%. Now that you can potentially just have to save 5% of the property. But the practicalities of the payment of that is that you just pay your 5% or whatever with your mortgage or whatever you want to pay, and then the government pay the developer directly. Is that the case?
Exactly, yeah. So it's great. So instead of giving, I suppose if you're looking at a 10% deposit, it's usually the way it works, as you know. So by the time you sign a contract with a traditional second-hand property, you've paid 10%. So that could be inclusive of some of the booking deposit you paid, and the rest is paid with the contract. So with the new build property, you still pay your booking deposit, but the help to buy funds are taken out of the 10%. So you actually pay a less of a contract deposit. You send that out, and then once the seller solicitor receives the contract, more or less the builder then receives the help to buy funds directly off the revenue, which is brilliant. So yeah, it comes off what the purchaser would have had to pay in the deposit.
And when you pay your contract deposit, that balance of 10%, is that then that's not refundable, is it?
No, so that, as I say, that's kind of the point of no return, to be honest with you. Technically, contracts are in duplicate, so technically it's when you receive one of the contracts back, also signed by the seller. But what I tell people is, look, you're signing the contracts, you're paying the deposit. Best thing mentally to get to think about is that this is when you're bound to the transaction. Now, the only I suppose get out of jail clause there is if something went wrong with your mortgage, which is crucially important. I always say it dates back to the recession, which is when unfortunately people were signing a contract, and in between signing a contract and getting the keys, things can go wrong, be it they lose their job or anything else, and the bank actually won't give them their loan funds that they had agreed to give them before they signed the contract. Technically, banks can do that. You'd be stuck in a contract and you obviously don't have a couple of $100,000 to complete without your mortgage. So the subject to loan clause means that yes, you're signing contracts, yes, you're binding yourself to a transaction, but look, if something goes wrong and the bank won't give you the money, there's no way you should be blamed for it. You're entitled to rescind the contract, back out completely, receive your contract deposit back, receive your booking deposit back off the estate agent, and you can walk away. So it's a crucial layer of protection for purchasers, in my view.
So if the transaction goes pretty smoothly, they pay their booking deposit, you're, as a solicitor for the purchaser, satisfied with the title, building, planning regulations, you've advised the client to sign the contract. So you get two blank contracts which both what the purchaser sign. They send the two copies to the vendor solicitors. The vendor countersigns both and sends you back one. That's when the actual legal agreement is in place, isn't it?
That's it, and that's when both parties have signed a binding contract. You each have one, it's each been signed by both parties, and I suppose getting into the nitty-gritty of the Help to Buy scheme, that actually needs to be uploaded by the purchaser, along with a copy of their loan offer, which I suppose is the government's way of knowing that, okay, we've got a signed and binding contract here, we know how much their loan is, we know how much the purchase price is, and that's when the funds are actually released to the builder. Not that the purchaser needs to worry about that too much, but they just need to be aware that they have a little bit of work to do on their application.
And then that leads you into the closing date. So as you get closer to the closing date, being the day the purchaser gets the keys of the property, you'll draw down the mortgage sums obviously in advance, and they will be transferred from the mortgage bank to the solicitor's client account and then sent on to the purchaser. On the day of a closing, what actually happens on that day? Because there's a few processes that must take place.
Yeah, exactly. So generally what we like to do to ensure that we hit the closing date is we send the funds ideally 2 days early. We have a same day transfer facility, but look, banks being banks, and you just want to make sure they land there. So you send them, they're held on trust, which is what we call it. So the solicitor will hold them. By no means will they release them to their client. They sit in the seller's solicitor's client account, and that's kind of that bit done. The seller's solicitor will send the original title documents. They would have sent us copies of everything previously. We would have sent them a list of everything that we require of them. So the seller's solicitor will send all that to ourselves, the buyer's solicitor. And then finally, the searches are carried out. Which I always tell our clients, by no means do we wish to cause offence, but we're going to run searches against you to see if there's been any judgments or bankruptcies or anything like that. And if you have a name like John Murphy, there's a chance something might turn up against a John Murphy and God knows where. All we need is our clients to say that they're not one and the same as that person.
So that's a standard process that happens on the sale, at the closing date of every sale or purchase, where you would do judgment bankruptcy searches against the purchasers, the sellers, and you'd also search against the property itself in case for any last minute loans or charges it might be put in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I mean, as you know, as we like to say, when you're a buyer, you buy the property warts and all. So you want to make sure that the physical structure is as it should be and there's no latent defects, but also you want to make sure that there's nothing that has attached itself to the property during the course of the transaction, like a lis pendens or any sort of mortgage or any sort of charge that the purchaser would walk into. So that's the reason for it. And I suppose, as you know yourself, that's the reason why it's done last minute, you know, to make sure that there's been nothing that has been added to it. It'd be extremely rare that there would be, but it's just to be safe.
So you've the money's been paid out, the purchaser's got their keys, all the documents are in order. What's the next stage for a solicitor now? Who pays the stamp duty on the property?
Yeah, so the buyer's solicitor would do that. They have to do it. We like to do it within a couple of days. You have, I think it's 40 days by the revenue before penalties would kick in. But look, we don't even want to get close to that. So we'd usually pay that within a couple of days. That would have been included in the initial fee note that would be sent to the client. So just before they sign contracts, when they're sending us the balance of deposit, we'd also look for the fees and outlay. So the stamp duty would be 1% of the purchase price. Up to $1 million, and over $1 million is 2%. And for new build properties, there's a little bit of a saving there in that you don't pay tax on tax. So a new build property would include VAT at 13.5%. So a little bit technical, but the 1% is worked out on the 86.5%. So a little bit of a saving there. But anyway, what we would do is we'd include all that in the fee note, explain it. We would pay the stamp duty using the PPS numbers of everyone involved. And we'd also carry out registration with the Property Registration Authority, which again has been covered in the fee note.
And if you're carrying out the registration process, so as you spoke earlier about the new digital system, the land registry, that's a nice clean application where you just make the application to the land registry to remove the old owners, put the new purchasers as the registered owners of title and register a mortgage. If you have the old type of registry deeds, the paper heavy title back to the 1800s in some cases, do you do then what's called the first registration, or how would you go about that title?
Yeah, exactly. So that's it. So I suppose the first registration, the reason why they call it that is it's being converted into the new form of automated title. Interestingly enough, you would think that the Property Registration Authority would charge more for a first registration application, but they charge significantly less. That's only €130 to do that. Whereas if you're buying a property for over €400,000, the fee would be that is, I think it's €800, isn't it, for over 400 grand? And then they also charge €175 for the mortgage. So it's actually a lot cheaper from the purchaser's point of view. They, again, don't need to be overly concerned about that. It's really for the solicitor to do the additional documents. There's a couple of additional forms that need to be filled out. Make sure you have the appropriate land registry compliant map. The process itself of registration will take longer. But again, from the buyer's point of view, what I always tell people is, look, it's in, you're the owner, it's just in the administration stage. If you want us to write you a letter confirming that you're the owner and you're just, you know, the application is being processed at the moment, we can do that. Sometimes people need that for schools or that sort of thing. And then what I say to people is when registration is completed, we'll get a folio, which is the automated title. The purchasers will see their names on the folio. Their bank will also be registered on the folio. We email them a copy of that folio so that they have that proof there sitting in their email. And then the title deeds go back to the bank for safekeeping.
Unless you're a cash purchaser, obviously, and the title deeds are kept in a safe. But that's then the bank hold the title deeds for the duration of the mortgage.
Yeah, exactly. And then look, if you ever wanted to remortgage, which I know people seem to be doing a bit at the moment because there's some great interest rates out there. So yeah, the bank hold the title deeds for however long they're the registered charge on the property. So if you took a mortgage to buy your property with Ulster Bank, for instance, the title deeds would go back to Ulster Bank. And if then you wanted to switch after a year or two or however long to AIB, the title deeds would be taken up from Ulster Bank by your solicitor. You would draw down the mortgage funds from AIB and use that to pay off Ulster Bank, and then AIB would actually take the title deeds. So it's whoever has the mortgage on the property, that's who physically holds the title deeds, unless, as you said, you're a cash buyer.
Excellent, Dave. That's fantastic information. Listen, thank you so much for your time today. What are the plans for John Gaynor Solicitors into the future?
Yeah, so I I suppose we're kind of somewhat of a traditional firm in the area we work in. So I also do quite a lot of conveyancing and property. I also do litigation. So really anything involving the courts. We also do wills and probate and enduring power of attorneys. So really what we're looking to do is kind of focus on those areas. You know, we're not a commercial firm. We don't try to be. We're a general practice firm who kind of care about dealing with our clients and making sure that things are done right. We're trying to find ways to increase the volume. You know yourself, when you're dealing with conveyancing, there's quite a lot of man hours that need to go into it, including the registration process and that sort of thing. So we're really trying to streamline it as much as possible, and informing buyers and sellers as to what we do and what they can do to help us. Really, first of all, it improves the satisfaction that you close quicker, to be honest with you. There's no silly delays. If you need to get a map for a property and you're a seller, you get that straight away. If you need to get an architect cert for an extension at the back, get that straight away. If you're a buyer, get your mortgage sorted straight away, get your insurance policies activated, all these sort of things that if you leave to the end, it can add a week, 2 weeks, whatever it might be. So really, we're just trying to streamline the conveyancing process as much as possible, to be honest with you, and just keep pushing forward.
Very good. And if there's any young people out there maybe doing their leaving cert, or someone is in doing a BCL in college, what advice would you give to someone starting out in a law degree or a law career? Would you recommend it?
Yeah. Depends what day you're asking. If it's a Tuesday at 7 p.m. and a shocker, then I don't know if I give you a different answer. But yeah, I mean, I think, and I didn't do it myself, but I think the key thing to do is to get into an office somewhere. You know, I think there's nothing more important than that. It could be any office, okay? It could be whether you see yourself in the IFSC, or you see yourself in-house with Google, or you see yourself in a small general practice place. Just get into an office, get to know people, meet people, ask them in person, and try to see as much of the different areas of law as you can. Believe it or not, I mean, I'm sure you're the same, Dave. If someone comes to you with a CV and they're just eager to spend a week somewhere to see if they like it or not, most solicitors are happy to take them on, you know, and there's probably a bit of admin work that they can do to kind of keep them busy and help you out a little bit. But also you want to kind of let people see what it's like and kind of encourage them a little bit. And then it's really about, I think it's crucial, obviously, to get your exams and your FE1s, but then it's really important not to pigeonhole yourself too early. And I have friends and colleagues who have done that. They're probably more the solicitors that aren't overly happy with their day-to-day, as opposed to my colleagues that have maybe started in one area and have gone into a different area because they actually wanted to and they wanted to see what it was like. But again, they're not afraid to move. And thankfully, and I hope that when this COVID-19 business is all dealt with, the legal market is actually very strong. There's a lot of in-house, there's a lot of tech companies, there's a lot of
plenty of options.
Yeah, and there's, you know, with Brexit and everything else, the big guys have come in, the international law firms, you know, hopefully there'll always be a need for general practice law firms as well. So there's so many different options out there, but I think getting practical experience, it helps the CV, but also it lets you know what sort of areas you like.
David, that's great advice. Thank you so much again for your time. We wish you all the best, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks.